Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith along with
Ivan Ozerets.
Ivan Ozerets at the table. We have Dave and Dave. What a common name, Dave and Dave. Got the good-looking Dave and the better-looking Dave. Dave Secker, Dave Anderson, welcome. Thanks for helping out again and again with this podcast.
My pleasure.
Before we get into our topic is academies. But before we do that, last night watching the Australian Open, and we're watching first we watched Diana Schneider, Dave Secker's student, and then we watched Dave Anderson's student, Ashlyn Kruger. Dave Secker, you go first. Tell us about your student, Diana Schneider.
I watched it on the plane coming back, and I had headphones on, and it took until 5-4 in the first set until I could actually hear her take a breath out. So I'm going to guess there was a little bit of nerves, which is okay in the first round of a Grand Slam. But once she started to let the athlete out there a little bit, things loosened up. She got it going pretty good. She played the Italian girl. She played her 4 times last year actually, and was 1 and 3 against her. But once she got past, she saved a couple set points, 4-5 down, and then she kind of loosened up and things got a lot simpler. It's decent. I mean, first round nerves at that level is very tense at the start of the season, I think.
Yeah, I saw the whole match. I didn't see Kruger's whole match, but you want to tell the listeners that with her forehand, you just looked right at her and said, just copy my forehand? Is that true?
Not as pretty as mine.
And Dave, what about Ashlyn Kruger? They could have played each other. I know they played each other before.
Yeah, I think they've met twice, split, I believe. One was a clay court event that got moved to an indoor hard.
Yep.
Which is, interesting for, I don't think a lot of people even realize it can happen, but it happened. And the other time, I think Ashlyn got that one, and then the other time was in Cincinnati. Schneider got her pretty handily, 4-0. Or something like that. But Ashlyn played, like Dave said, about, Schneider is that, came out, tight. I think that, when you're tight and you're a retriever, and you're used to kind of being that kind of player who maybe is building points a little bit more and just, reacting rather than trying to be the proactive player on the court. I think you can work through the nerves a little bit easier, but when you're accustomed to striking and doing that from the back of the court primarily, I think the nerves are going to be on display a little bit stronger. But having said that, I mean, I think it was definitely a day she was, wishes she could have over, but hopefully it'll be a great learning experience for her. That's where I think players in general just being able to legitimately have plan A and plan B and hopefully a plan C. And when one part goes south a little bit, having the ability to adapt and go to that secondary plan depending on how you're doing and how you're feeling on a day. But I think it'll serve to be a great experience, hopefully.
She's had a good start to the season, though, right? I think so.
Yeah, great start. And the past few weeks, like I said, very, very good with movement and looking to a lot of forward intent in just taking court away, even if small bites out of the baseline. And when she plays that way, I think she's able to play tennis against anybody. But for her to kind of take an attitude of staying back and rallying, retrieving, even though she's gotten far more capable of it at doing that, I don't think it serves her well.
Really good tennis players. I mean, Schneider, I think, is 12 in the world, and Kruger is 54. Kruger actually had beat her opponent the week before, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. She beat her the previous tournament. And I think that, I've watched Tomljanovic play, a couple of times, once or twice in person. And then I've always thought she's a great player, potentially. I think she she's very prone to the yips inside. Her a lot of her challenges seem to be neck up, and but she showed signs of it. I mean, Ashlyn was down, significantly in the third set, looking like it was going to be over in, a couple of minutes after 4-0, and all of a sudden, yeah. And then, the next thing it was 5-4, and she managed to pull it together and finish it out, which was, I think for her, a huge accomplishment, really.
I think both players played opponents that played similar to the way they play. What are your thoughts on that? Go ahead, Dave Secker.
Yeah. I mean, Katurito is not comfortable against her. And she sort of draws. She takes me, she says, my favorite opponent again. Because the ball's flat, she takes time away. And, Diana, like, if she can set her feet on the forehand, she's dangerous. But Katurito's she's not coming forward much, but she takes time away. Like, she's hugging that baseline. And she's pretty balanced on both sides. Like, she's got pretty solid grips, and she challenges the baseline. So I think for Diana, you see, like, early, she was a little tentative, and the ball's just like eating her up. Once she loosened up a little bit and she was able to back her up, she got it going. But no, that's a tricky opponent for her, for sure.
Dave Anderson, I watched it with a bright young man, a father of two. He's been studying tennis through his children. He's a psychiatrist, so he studied forever. And what he said about Ashlyn Kruger is that he said he thought she was always moving laterally. She wasn't really moving in diagonally off the ground strokes. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it, to me, movement and intent and looking to, having that attitude of kind of hunting the ball, looking to attack. I don't think, if you look at last night's match and then you look at the previous 2 weeks, and the intent was really not recognizable, in my opinion. There was a ton of lateral movement, giving way more court away than she had been. And, credit to Tom Lajanovic, you get a little bit about being able to back her up a bit, but, I think that you can learn from a match like that. But I think that the, overall developmental path, being really clear in the player's mind and such helps eliminate some of those difficult moments last night, for sure.
I love that word, intent. I tell my players all the time, when I see you on the scooter on campus and I run you over, if the police can't prove intent, I'm only getting manslaughter. I'm only getting manslaughter. It's just true, right? Like I bet I didn't watch Ashlyn's match. I've been watching the highlights because she obviously plays the winner. But if you had that match back, I think most players usually in that situation, they tell you, I probably should have been more aggressive or played with more intent, right? Very rarely do you hear them say, yeah, I probably should have dialed it back a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if you just looked at the stats, it would show differently. It'd show a slew of errors, but I think that they were a result of not having intent.
Yeah, the whole thing, the curse of winning, if you'd ask each player, put a crystal ball on it, if you could just think, okay, the match, win or lose, how do you want to play? Win or lose, how do you want to play? And no, I think all players, WTA, ATP as well as certainly can preach from the service line in, just every once in a while, because it was one of those things, the old Vic Braden line, you just mail in the scores. If, just who's going to be a little bit better from the baseline. It was a red zone to red zone confrontation, both matches. And, going way back, Ashlyn Kruger, I mean, she was taught to volley so well. Why don't you make one comment each on the doubles in that? Are they getting in playing doubles enough? I mean, are they working enough on their volleys? What do you think, guys?
Oh, no, strong no from me.
Yeah. And how about you, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I think it almost goes without saying that the doubles isn't being played the way that both of those girls should be playing. And also, I think if you examine where most of the people put a bulk of their time on the practice court, I always tell the kids here, I said, give your volleys equal love. Even if you're not going to use them, just give them equal love. I hate to see kids spend 30 minutes hitting at the back of the court and then they come in and hit 5 volleys and 1 overhead and let's go. I'd rather see them just spin the racket and go and not warm anything up. And, but yeah, I just think in general, the players overall, most of them out there, I think they very little, except the double specialists. I think they pay very little attention to, the midcourt in. I think they feel they do, but proportionate to their training package that their block of training they're devoting to their tennis. I think it's, some on the serve, some on the return, a lot on the return, and then a lot up the ground.
I remember being with Dave Secker out at the 18 and under clays in Memphis, and one of our players, Sophia Patel, you said to her, "You volley well, you hit over as well. Don't you think it's fun to hit volleys?" I thought that was a great question because she, got tight and didn't go forward. That does happen.
Totally. We talked about it we did a webinar earlier, right? I think what they don't understand sometimes as well is that work they do up there serves them so well in other parts of their game, right?
Yeah.
Dave Secker, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about the webinar we did with the Intercollegiate Tennis Association?
I don't know how, but for some reason the ITA has signed Steve and I and Ivan up to do show how we look through film. So we've been doing a stroke a week. We probably should have started. I was thinking today we should have started with the volleys and the overhead to kind of get to our point of what we were getting to with the turns on the ground strokes and the serve. But it's basically a 1 hour look at how, Steve and I, if we were looking at film of one of our players, and college coaches are welcome to send in their players, we'd go through filming, how we film, the different angles, and we talk through like the languages we use and some of the common flaws we're seeing with the players. And then we try to follow up with some pretty simple drills and routines that could be implemented. We did the serve, did the volley. Everybody will be fired up for the forehand next week. It's so exciting. And then we'll finish with the backhand, I think. But yeah, the feedback's been pretty good. I actually got quite a few emails this evening about it. They seem to enjoy the volley one.
And how can people who are not connected to the ITA see those classes?
It's a recorded webinar, so we need to get them. I remember speaking to Lauren, who's moderating it. She's going to send you the links, and we need to give you the ability to publish them on the website as well.
And give us Lauren's last name and title, what she does with the ITA.
It's Lauren Conching. She's the Director of Education for the ITA, which is the governing body of college tennis.
Oh, that's great. Thanks.
That's a cool project. Yeah.
We've had people write in with topics, and one is Academy, so we thought we'd address that. Wasn't too long ago, I was doing a workshop with Dave Secker at NC State where he works, and I heard Dave say, paraphrasing, "Americans must realize Spaniards do not go to Spanish academies." And then I thought about that. I said, gee, I wish I had said that. I know that you spent a lot of time in Spain. I think we can talk about some European academies are Americanized and commercialized at this point. What's for you and Simon, what's the college coach's perspective on academies? About the American kid typically with an academy or the foreign kid. I think right now, you just go through this and turn it back over to you guys. I would say Spain is the number one destiny right now. I think Florida may still be 2, the U.S., and then France 3. I think with Dave, been in junior development for 40 years. I think being 30 years in one place, a little bit longer. Just in Dallas, how is the academy? How has that changed Dallas in the time that you've been there? Tennis throughout the city, shopping and bopping, players and parents not staying the course with one program. But let me just read this off, and then we'll start. But the name Academy, to me, Nick Bollettieri, maybe 1978, but definitely 1979, because I know I was there. with we had Chuck Creasy on a couple weeks ago or a week ago, and I worked for All American Sports after Chuck. At one point, Nick Baltieri and Harry Alman both worked for All American Sports, a company that had basically tennis camps throughout New England in the summer, Florida in the winter. There were some overseas, for example, Puerto Rico, the Bahamas. But going back to Baltieri, the word academy, he was a paratrooper. So the discipline, that was important to him. Prior to moving back to the States, Nick was in San Juan for many, many years. And even though he goes way back to having taught Brian Godfrey, the late Baltieri, for the longest time, he taught adult players at, a resort hotel setting. But I think people would give Nick credit to the first academy. We go back to so many of the players, like early years, and Carling Bassett, Jimmy Arias, and Aaron Krickstein. But they were at the Colony in Sarasota, really nice resort right on the water. Then they bought a club, a 17-court club in Bradenton. And then they bought land. This Mark McCormick, IMG, the founder of IMG, they went to the orange groves, bought lots of land, and I think they went from 17 to 77 courts combined. So they moved from Sarasota to Bradenton. An academy, I went to a boarding school, it was called an academy. An academic place, a place to study. The term military academy, train in a special field, going way back originally to National Park in Athens, Greece. Plato taught philosophy, and it was called an academy. Ironically, today, I think in academies, I would say there's a lack of instruction and abundance of emotion. But many people would tell you that it is the American model now. It's the American junior tennis culture. And many times, academies are held in high regard. I would say in many ways, too, they're overrated. But let's get into academies. Let's go to England first. We'll go England and Texas. Go ahead. What's the Englishman have to say about academies? What's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Yeah, I think in tennis it is Baltieri, right? Or IMG as it's called now. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you're right, it's an academic word, but I don't think it's to me, I think of it as a business now. I was in Spain in the late 90s playing. I did a year and a half there, and it was all club based. You would call it like teams, but it was still club based things. But you certainly had an affiliation to a club. It wasn't really referred to that way. The first big one in Spain was Sanchez Casal. They bought a huge lot of land out by the airport, which was basically like a farmland, and they produced this mass produced thing. And it took our Spanish tennis was hard at the end of the 90s and then really boomed when Nadal came out. So it was kind of like the Florida of Europe, and people were just flocking there. And I think obviously Spain went through really bad economic times in the 2000s and the early 2010s. They had times where they had like over 50% unemployment amongst people under 30. So the academies kind of got forced to bring in this. It was a big source of foreign income for tennis. So it's Spanish tennis now it's very commercialized and sold. You see them popping up all around the world, but the actual core tennis clubs are still functioning the same. They're almost like secrets now. But the Spaniards aren't there. Basically, the Spaniards got pushed into like these smaller clubs. But that's why I think of an academy. And obviously, when I came here, that word is getting used very loosely. I would be very interested to know in Bradenton and Sarasota how many hits you could get on Google for tennis academy. There's got to be 15. Like the satellite versions and things that popped up from Baltieri's is an incredible amount of them, I think.
What they say about Baltieri's is the blue whale theory, because it was so large, the largest academy as far as enrollment. And, the consumer would come in. We could also say consumer beware. Does the consumer have consumer knowledge? Does the pro have product knowledge? We've gone through that. But there's so many spinoffs, so many small academies, because people have gone there and they thought they were just a number. They weren't getting enough attention. That happens in every walk of life. Okay, we'll go somewhere else. But yeah, there are in that Bradenton area many, many small academies. And I would say everything today is called an academy. Let's go to ND. Is it North Dakota or North Dallas? Either or. What do you got, Anderson?
Dakota. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just semantics to some degree, from our end, right? The way we see it. I mean, it's coaching, teaching, and it has just become a mainstream wording for people that are running any kind of tennis for juniors throughout the whole world, really. Certainly here, I remember about 15, maybe 20 years ago, Steve, and I was talking to you on the phone, and I said, unfortunately, Dallas is becoming like South Florida because it's just like Coach Secker. I'm going to say that instead of Dave. It's like the he was saying. I mean, there's just everywhere with car trunk pros and apartment courts with 2 or 3 courts and I think what happens here in Dallas now is what happened in IMG or Boletaries in that you get a coach there who is kind of a little disgruntled with being low man on the totem pole, and he starts corralling 3 or 4 kids, and then the next thing they're off on their own, and there's just all these little subgroups. But to me, it's just a word. It's kind of like when people say the GreatBase. I mean, the meaning of the GreatBase is what they have to understand, the building blocks, the pillars. But again, it's just wording. And one of my coaches who's been here since 2010, 11, he came to me, you had kind of just initiated the GreatBase, and he said, how come you didn't tell me about the GreatBase? And I said, I did. It was called TennisNet. And, eventually there'll be another word that'll replace academy. It's just typical of our tennis industry to have this kind of jargon and such flow out and load and explode and all these different things. But I think that what has happened in youth sport, I mean, it's become $1 billion industry. And I think the more you dress up the name, I remember, Steve, when we were in Boca, trying to create the name and went with Seguso Bassett Tennis Training Center, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. You're right.
But, I remember there was debating on that, going back and forth. And I really haven't ever, from my end, personally given it any thought, even though I guess it's Brookhaven Tennis Academy. But I think it's changed names, and I didn't even know it. I think it was something else, and it was just so long. We were just like, forget it. You can't fit it on a T-shirt. And so we'll just call it Brookhaven. I think it's like anything, right? It's what happens behind the that matters. And I do think that it is very typical of especially some of the boarding places. They rely on it. So I think there's different kinds of environments, and the boarding places have to get people in and fill those rooms. And the longevity of players at those places is limited. And I'm anxious to read this new book by, the young Aussie that got placed there, Lay. I can't recall his first name, but he just wrote that book, Smashed. And his experiences that he talks about while at IMG at the world's top 12 and under, and I don't have any. I mean, I'm into tennis, and I mean, I wouldn't care if they never use the word academy in the place I'm affiliated with now, or if they choose to use it. It's more just about getting to the court and getting things done, and not letting kids fall through the cracks, which I do think happens when it becomes a money-driven activity, for sure.
The original idea, like I remember I got to sit with voluntary about the original idea was just to put like-minded people together, right? Which is the academic base of it. Is like my father taught at the Royal Academy of Music. They got the best musicians together and had them share ideas and then try and pass that on, right? And Voluntary's idea was just to get the best of the best together. And obviously then they saw the commercial opportunities, right? But one thing you never hear is, do you ever hear people talk about like the academy coaches, like oh man, this academy grows great coaches, or this academy has produced this coaching tree. You hear about the marketing and this and that and the other. Like I can tell you in Spain, the academy idea at first they weren't really talking about the academies, but they were saying this club has the best preseason. Like the reason we went to Brugueras, or most of the Brits, was we were told you can get together in September. They run like this 10-week preseason, which is like something you've never seen. And they have these unbelievable fitness coaches. And some of the best players from Spain will arrive there. And it was like this whole, we can do this thing as a preseason, as a group. So that was really the idea, which I think is closer to the idea of like what the actual word means, right? But the problem is once people saw the monetizing opportunities, right, and some famous people behind it, that's why it just seemed to go south at the end of the mid 80s, I guess. But the original idea was just to put a group of people who had like really high achieving goals, right?
At one point, Bollettieri's, I think it was great. It was called the toughest playground in tennis. And on a previous podcast, Dave Anderson mentioned unsupervised matches. So a lot of times at Bollettieri's, they'd have matches in the afternoon, and they're just out there on their own playing. And there's so many stories, so many great stories from Bollettieri's, and many academies will have certainly the upside, but then the downside. Many of the players, it's like, and I have great respect for the late Bollettieri, but Agassi had won the national indoor 14s before they ever met. So he's a pretty good player. And Nick, one of our students who spent a lot of time at Bollettieri's, her father called him Barnum. And what a great promoter. He made it seem like he was in the hospital when Agassi was born. We'll get back to Seguso basketball. One trivial point is Robbie Seguso, I think it was 3 years in a row, among the players on the ATP circuit, he was voted most popular. But he wasn't so easygoing when it came down to the name, because it's Carlene Bassett Seguso. And so I remember saying, well, the Bassett Seguso Academy, but it did become the Seguso Bassett Academy. That's a story in itself, because I was brought in and I was interviewed and offered the job. And I said, well, I'll take the job if you just become Seguso Bassett Academy, because it was going to be Seguso Bollettieri. And the contract had already been signed. So next thing you know is I was in and Nick was out. Nick was always upset with me on that. But with Carlene, he forgave Carlene. There's a story about Carlene Bassett. The late John Bassett was a very, very successful businessman. So he drops his daughter off. I think she was 8. And my daughter really wants to be a tennis player. And that might have been after Nick was on 60 Minutes, because it just, the PR really exploded. In the very first years, I mean, everybody in tennis knew what was going on, or knew like, this is different. This is, kids are going here just for tennis. So he said, hey, I'll be back in a month, but my daughter wants to be a tennis player. I'll pay whatever the fee is. And they said, okay. He came back a month later and he said, Nick, I've got a gift for you outside. He goes outside and there's 2 brand new Mercedes buses. And so anyway, Carlene was very, very close to Nick, but that was her beginnings with Nick Bollettieri. So they ended up, if you remember Dave Anderson, they ended up being a consultant when we first were there. They came over once a month and gave us some advice. Mm-hmm. Because I was just told Robbie, I said, well, why would you want to be a franchise? And I think you can put McDonald's up and pretty soon Burger King is going to be on the next corner, but I don't think you can franchise tennis. A lot of people have tried. I think that we really should be pushing, because the word academy, I think, is here to stay. I mean, I think you're right that the name could go away, but I've tried to push the term pre-academy. Why don't you go with that, Coach Secker? What do you think of the term pre-academy?
Well, we're really saying college prep, right? I mean, it's, to me, any academy, certainly in this country, the goal, I know that the people come in the door for the player on TV, but the goal for the kid who's in housing there has got to be getting them ready and getting them going to college programs, right? Where they're going to get their education paid for and they're going to get through that system. Because especially think about kids coming in from the outside, foreign, who don't know. that, to me, it's college prep. It's pre-academy is the word we use, obviously trying to get people ready for what's about to come, right? But I think these academies are in a way great systems for college prep, because obviously it gives the college coaches a focal point as well.
With pre-academy, I know at Roddick's at one point, was at one time I did some things when John Roddick was in charge, but he was traveling. When I was there, he was traveling with Andy. And then Myron Grunberg and a few pros bought the Roddick Academy, but kept the Roddick name. And they had the lesser players, newcomers, they had come and see me for 3 weeks before they could enroll in the academy. I think most academies are driven on emotion, who's playing who. And I think that's certainly with Nick. He was fortunate that Mark McCormick came along and bailed him out, because Nick would see somebody hit the ball really well and he'd put him on scholarship. And, that's one thing too, is that those kids who were on scholarship, the way they were treated, they were not customers. They were players, and they were treated differently. It's like Carleen Bassett said about Nick. She said, I think he was the best junior coach in the world, but the worst pro coach in the world, because the pro coach would be the boss. But Dave Anderson, pre-academy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I've always liked that wording. I've also really liked the term college prep. I mean, we talked about that years back. And college tennis being the goal, pro tennis being the dream. I mean, it's funny because, at least in the lifetime I've been coaching, it seems to every 5-10 years trickle downward, in that players are not, they're barely even playing the game of tennis, and they feel they need a scenario in terms of their coaching and a team around them and things around them that, replicate Djokovic at this point in his life, or one of the players that are out on the circuit. And I feel like the every kid from our top to our bottom essentially need the same things. It's just how they're applied to them. I had a very good player today. I mean, he just won a gold ball in doubles up in Chicago, and he hit an approach shot, and the ball went by him, and he was at the service line. I was 2 inches from him. I said, "You got to get in," and he said, "It would have been a winner anyways, wouldn't it?" And I said, and he wasn't even like being. He was just, and I said, "That's not the point." I said, "Yes, it would have been, but," I said, "You got to get in." And so, I mean, to me, the skills, whether it's pre-academy, whether it's high performance, however the wording is, they're essentially the same. I mean, I think kids see, when George is back here, for instance, to, see if you rebuilt his game, and George Goldoff, and when they see him do cross courts, or when they see him work out on the ball machine, it looks really cool because his skills are really good. It's the excellence of the skill sets that makes these ordinary drills look so cool. And I think that there's an illusion from the players that haven't, really built anything yet, that there's some magic going on at the top. And I think in true teaching environment, it's just all skill building for different stages of the game, depending on who's walking through your court.
George Goldoff, poor guy, 7 months COVID stuck with me.
Shout out to George for that. Won his first Challenger of the Year over in Portugal.
Still got his stupid face on my fridge from the wedding. I saved his life. I sent his wife to school in Austin.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I saved his life.
Huh. Well, Ron George, he definitely married way over his head. We have to get that in. We're a fact-based program. I called George Silveroff, and George said to me, because my dad wants to know why you call me Silveroff. Well, didn't you tell him? Because you're not golden yet. You're just not golden yet. But you're going to get there. You're going to get there. With Here's a fun term: anti-academy. Ryler DeHart, bright guy. He was very, very frustrated. I mean, he became one in the 18s. He has a March birthday, and so they extended it. When they changed the birthday, they changed it. There's been 3 since all the years I've been in tennis. So he got to be bumped up to 1 in 18s, but obviously he was right up there anyway. Then he was 1 in the NCAA, so very respectable player. And he was, part of what we've done for a long time. Thomas Ollerstedt, who I was a student of mine, started him off. And then I was working with him via video when he was in the 12s. And when he was 13, I was living in the same city. But we'd have these players come in, good players, and they'd be sent maybe for 3 days or 3 weeks to just work on their game. So initially, he would get to play the first few days that a player was there. I mean, if it was a short-term visitor, you just maybe only play 1 set. And then they would be there, and we wouldn't have them playing. So he called us the anti-academy, because most academies are really pushed on match play. And people need that. But I think coming back to pre-academy is people go too soon. And it's a fact, like, you just mentioned Chicago, Dave, there was more players produced in the Midwest when kids just stayed at home. They were going to regular school and they just stayed at home. And there's so many other factors. There were not level 2s and level 3s. You had to play in your section. It was a big thing to play in your section. But the anti-academy, let's go to Coach Secker. What do you think is a typical assessment, typical day one for someone at academy?
Well, I can tell you what it is. We really about it. It's how are we going to, what is the sell, right? It's a business conversation with what does the player need? What is the family looking for? And how are we going to pitch that to them? And you go back to Dave Anderson's point there. It's like, you hear these conversations like 13-year-old who's like a solid national player. Let's say they're playing hard courts in the 14s, maybe a 5-star, good tennis player. It's like, should we uproot the family, get out of our school, and go with some stranger who we've had a few conversations with, and just change our entire life? And there is this very strange scenario to me, like where it's doing it. I understand academies let's say in Dallas, right? So you got a player who gets to a good level and they're within driving distance to Brookhaven and they want to be around other good players in the area, and you've got a good coaching staff there, and it's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go train at that group. But it's when these people uproot across the country. I understand maybe from North Dakota, the options could be limited, right? But people are hopping around in populated places, and they're hopping sides of the country in populated places. And that seems a bit strange to me, because it's this idea that you have no chance. So it's like, if you're doing well, you have no chance if you just keep on that path. Like, if you have a good coach and you have access to some basic fitness and you're doing well, that you have no chance that you're just going to keep improving unless you suddenly make this huge change. And that's the bit that gets to know me. I mean, obviously, I worked in an academy in California, but we're Californians. And these kids were just rolling out a 0 period, coming in after lunch. We had quite a few boarders, but they were more like for the international ones. But we had, the real crux of it was we just had kids from the area. And that's why it was so good. It was a hub for people in the area. And I think that's the better way to me than uprooting families is where it gets a little dicey for me.
Dave, with that comment, what about Europe? Obviously, you're from England, spent time in Spain as a kid, but even recruiting, the train system, proximity, closeness to home, a kid can be away from home Monday through Friday training, go home on the weekend. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's just very different. And the other thing as well is in Europe, it's so much more club-based, because the club is more of the identity than, let's say, an academy or marketing, right? The club is really responsible for that type of stuff. And there's also a big stigma in Europe about kind of hopping around. Like the idea is that you want to have long-term coaching And especially that people are quite, like in England, people are quite nervous to pull a kid out of school. It has to be pretty extreme example where they're not finishing school, or they're going to like a different type of schooling just to accommodate their sports. It's like, well, you better really be. I mean, obviously Raducanu's had her struggles, right? But she's still a Grand Slam champion. She finished full high school in England because it was seen as like risky not to. It means we have one of the biggest soccer leagues in the world, the biggest. But those kids, even those the top Brits, unless they are international level at 18, they're finishing school.
I do think that players will go to the academy that has the best players. I think of Ryan Harris and his brother Christian. They were at Shreveport, Louisiana. Then they were at Nukes, and then they went from Nukes to Bollettieri's. I do think that's a factor. That a lot of times the parent and the player, they're so concerned about who's in the academy, and that's where there's a backroom deal. And hopefully we're giving some insight to parents that are considering going to an academy. How about in Dallas, Dave, bopping and shopping? I mentioned that. Why don't you talk about that?
I think it's become, like I said, it's become very similar to South Florida. We've been fortunate here. We've been here a long time. I take more pride in the down periods we've had where we haven't had a lot of athletes coming through the door, but we still got some kids down the road, and maybe it's not to marquee schools, but they enjoyed a college experience, and then when you get athletes through the door, I mean, you're 100% right. The athletes improve, the athletes start to win, and people. You've said it a million times, Steve. Typically, I think I referenced it the other day. I mean, people. I don't think the kids are influenced by the pros as much as they are the best player in the tournament that they're playing, and the parents, 100% along that line. They don't want to hear about the work Medvedev's done, between where he is today and when he was a kid. They just want to look and see if there's a Medvedev type player at the club to hit with, but there's a lot. I mean, I lose players through our program to neighboring programs, and it's interesting in my years of doing this that about 10 years ago, the whole concept of we got to get to Florida kind of dried up. And then it's really made a strong resurgence here in the past 7-8 years, maybe even less time. It kind of went away for a while. And I'm not sure why, at least in this region of the country.
Do you think it's because Florida didn't have the restrictions in COVID, where people felt like that was maybe the only place they could get to and still have that freedom?
It might have. That might be it. But it definitely has changed here in the last handful of years, and maybe even a little before that. But there just wasn't really, it felt like the illusion of it. I tell people all the time in parents' meetings and with kids, I'm like, let's just play a game, okay? Let's take the exact setup that is in Florida with courts at every perceived academy, wherever it is, from IMG to Saddlebrook to Everett, Gomez, Sanchez, Cassell. Let's take all of those and let's move them and their coaches in the exact situation up to Duluth, Minnesota. And we're going to make Duluth, Minnesota, the northern Minnesota area will now become where all the academies are. I said, how many do you think will want to go there? So, I mean, you have, and every kid, I just had, 2 kids come back to Dallas from, spending a year there. And I said, would you have gone to Duluth for the experience that you had? And they said, no, absolutely not. I mean, at the end of the day, some of the, and again, I can't, this isn't a blanket statement, but Steve said the backroom deal of the scholarship kid to draw in some neighboring kids. And, I mean, I worked at Nukes, and if you were a top player in your section or had a certain ranking, you got a letter in the mail. And,
it's recruiting. It's recruiting, right?
Yeah, there was a lot of recruiting, and I get it. I mean, I like what you said earlier, Dave, about, like-minded people. And Ashlyn, disappeared from our environment for a while, but the reality, she went and hung out with Savannah Broadus and a couple of other like-minded people up at a neighboring academy. And I think it was better for her at the end of the day. My feelings were probably hurt at the time, but, you do want to be around like-minded people. I mean, that's why.
No, I totally agree. California is a little bit of a bubble because obviously when you live in California, those kids and those parents, they're not looking outward saying, oh man, I wish I was in Florida or something. They're California and they still have that a bit stronger thing. But we had a player pretty similar trajectory to Ashlyn reminds me of her, Carson Branstein. She was 3 in the world, won a couple of Grand Slams. And we would have 3 kids drive up from San Diego, which is an hour on a good day. It's 2 hours in traffic. Now, it'd be hitting on a court, a group of maybe 8 girls. It'd be like 3 kids from San Diego. I'm like, guys, didn't we have tennis courts in San Diego? They're like, but it literally there was a group of girls, and they just wanted to be around certain people. And it was much more the peers of like, well, she's in this group, we want to be in this group. And we had another one before her who'd won a couple of Grand Slams and juniors, but the players and the parents very quickly figure out where everybody is because obviously they're talking, right? And now I think with social media, they're talking more. But I think it is that it's not so much the pro thing as much in the juniors, but it's more like who's kind of top of the national mountain or the ITF mountain. That's really, people would just kind of appear there.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when Steve and I, when I was with you, Steve, out in Boca, and I think we hadn't even confirmed we were going to do it yet. And we drove back to get all of our stuff from Boca. And there was a girl from San Diego, Fuchs. And, I remember on the drive back to Texas, and I was thinking to myself, man, San Diego? I would have cut my leg off to go to be in San Diego when I was a kid playing tennis, and here they were uprooting to come to be a part of the experience in Boca. And I think sometimes it really, like you said, I've never understood because I kind of like I've always struggled with what Uncle Tony did with Rafa in the sense of I love what he did. He didn't, hey, we're good here. We're good here in Mallorca, the Federation. Good luck to you guys. We're good on our own. And then he went and built this huge academy. And I get that it's a business decision, but if people just examine that fundamentally, the things he did to build Rafa Nadal are in direct conflict with everything going on inside of that academy in a sense, or the nature of it. So I could never figure out the Fuchses wanting to come from San Diego all the way to Boca. Although, Steve, she did change her forehand in that trip we made down and back. And
going back to Florida, the prices have gone way up, real estate costs. But I would say years ago that Florida had more academies than California. That's a fact. But closer to South America, closer to Europe, more clay courts, overall more players. But the cost of real estate, I had a place in Tampa where you could sleep 20 people. I remember, Dave, how many years did you work with Jimmy Johnson? Many years, right?
5 years, yep.
That, Jimmy would come out to visit and bring some players, and you could almost move the decimal point at one point for what that house cost in Tampa for what it would cost in the Newport Beach, Irvine area. I'm always giving Ivan, who's at the table, he's from Mission Viejo. If anyone's ever been to Mission Viejo, it's such a beautiful place.
The mean streets of Mission Viejo.
Here's a thought, the landscape of junior tennis is always changing, but if someone wanted to invest in real estate, they can give me a call. And what goes on in Boca Raton with what they've done at a tennis park, the USTA and Nick Paul and Rick Macy, the huge sign, and one's a nonprofit organization and one is private sector. And it's at a public park. And I mean, it was a chapter of my life. I was there like every weekend for 2 years. And I'd keep my hoodie up and keep a low profile and just kind of observe as much as I could what's going on. If someone wanted to buy a piece of property, I mean, I could send them a constant flow of players and they could be in the boarding. They could be boarding tennis players. No coaching involved. Don't need any tennis courts. It'd be nice to have tennis courts. It'd be nice to have coaches. But people are flocking to Florida for UTR tournaments. Up here in the mountains, we have, they haven't hired a new tennis director, but we have 12 clay courts that are pretty much empty. And I've told the general manager that, well, the way it works in junior tennis, I don't really like it, but when the draw sheet comes out, or better, even before the draw sheet's made, the tournament entry list. Say if you're 10 on the UTR and you look up, there's the best players that have signed up are below you. Like I don't want to go to that tournament. It won't help my UTR. But I do think that players attract players. And a lot of times people do need the pre-academy. They do need the anti-academy where they just can't jump into the fire. They've got holes in their game. And it's not a matter, say if you're, and obviously it's hard to believe that people would leave like Texas to go to Florida, uproot the family, as Coach Secker said. But there are more international players. If there's more tennis, it doesn't mean that the quality is that high. It's like in Canada, there's more hockey players, but there's some pretty bad hockey players too. But they do have more. So that's an interesting thought. Tell us, Ivan, what do you think about academies? You went to academies. How many academies do you go to in Southern Cal?
Not many. Trying to think back here. No, I I started locally, a local coach, right in Mission Viejo, Felipe Tennis Center across the street. Went to another local coach, just bounced around from local coach to local coach, and really only went to a quote unquote academy in my later years, and later in 21. I was in college and was back from winter break, and my sister at the time was going to Jimmy Johnson's Academy in Newport Beach. It was called Advantage at the time. It's since been dissolved. It just so happened that I was like, hey, can I just join? I was out of my realm. It was a bunch of teenagers, and I was just a 21-year-old and out of college, just looking to, hit some balls because I still loved it. And I joined, and observations are very interesting because it was exactly what I thought it was going to be. It was just a lot of, just from the baseline, bring everybody in every 20 minutes, give a new drill, and all the drills are either, okay, hit a big ball down the line or hit a big ball cross court. And there were some mix-ins where it's like, okay, you warm up with some volleys, but really I was there. I went for like a month or a month and a half for just out of my own interest. And it wasn't very educational. It was structured for sure, because you had to manage all the kids that were there looking to hit balls and get better. But they were only getting better through, as a runner gets better by just running a lot. No technique, no instruction for the most part. I mean, I'm biased compared to what we have going on. Fortunately, up here in Wintergreen, where we have a classroom setting and chalk talks, and we, are fortunate to pull more hours than let's say the academy that I had gone to or visited. But it was interesting to see how players would want to get better through these academies by just hitting a lot of balls and playing a lot of matches. And from the outside point of view, parents looking on, players looking on, out of all these players, some must have gotten better. And so the idea becomes that, I guess if some people can get better, then everybody can get better, so I can get better. However, it later became obvious to me, again, thankfully through the fact that I had visited these these sessions that I met a player by the name of Aiden Rideout. He's on a mission now in the Congo, I believe. So hopefully he's doing all right. But he had introduced me to the website and the information, and that's how I got my ball rolling and all the technical, tactical side of the game that I hadn't previously been exposed to in the 21 years of my life. Up until then, I started playing when I was 7, so that would be quick math, like 14 years. I just hadn't known about it at all, which is unfortunately the same circumstance for most players and most coaches even. But so I'm thankful and grateful for that opportunity to even get exposed to the information. But in terms of academies, this is a podcast about academies. It's very much, it felt like a business, and I was a number. And I wasn't looking to be anything more because I didn't know that anything else existed. I just thought that that's how players got better because that's all I knew. It kind of shined a light on the fact that, this is how tennis is. This is the culture of tennis. This is, get to a court, you have your players, you have your group, you have a ball basket, you have a certain amount of time allotted, go hit balls, okay, you're done, go eat at cafeteria, hang out with your friends, go back for a second session, and then you have schoolwork. And players who have the opportunity to be homeschooled, they have, more of a chance because they get to hit more balls and spend more time. So quantity is important, but really the quality of the information and their time there is very important.
I think one thing to, just put ourselves in a different pair of shoes. You think about the parent who's writing the check, taking the kid to the academy. The coach, it's not easy for the coach. I think of, say there's, 20 players. Dave Secker, I talked to Jimmy Johnson, who you worked with for 5 years. And obviously, Dave Anderson was classmates with him way, way back when. And, when people say they move from Missouri to Southern Cal, their expectations are not to show up and be filmed and say, we got to rebuild your game. They actually uproot the family for competition. So it makes it very difficult for the academy owner, the academy operator, because the consumer, they don't want to go backwards. They've made the move thinking that their child's much better than they are, and say, where do we sign up? Tournaments. I one time was at the Advantage Tennis Academy, and I figure, well, no one, these young guys, they don't know me. Who's this old bald-headed guy? And I put him through skills tests, the alley test and the quadrant test, and smiling Jimmy Johnson comes out, and people are dropping the racket, throwing the racket into the fence, and one of the players really lost it, and his father made him come and apologize to me because they just found out they couldn't hit the target. But that's not really how you'd want to do it if you're trying to get some people pumped up on false confidence. Like, well, you just moved here from Missouri and you want to go play some tournaments, and you just want to be here for the Southern California sunshine. So, Dave, you were there. I mean, we all know. What are your thoughts on that? It's very difficult, the person who's operating an academy, to convince the consumer, like, well, yeah, you showed up here, but we think you really need to improve your serve. And they're like, well, we've already signed up for 6 tournaments in a row.
Yeah, first of all, I know now who gave me that bad Yelp review based on Ivan.
No. I was there later. I hadn't seen you. No, I've got to chime in and say that, no, I only love and respect for the service that was provided. I had a great time.
It's 100%. Yeah, no, it's a different thing. Like the academy, I can tell you, I think I worked there during a good time. Personally, and the way that group was when we were there, we had those 6 backcourts. The after school was the lifeblood of that program. You can call it an academy, you can call it whatever you want, but it was the junior program at RCI Irvine, and it was called Advanced Tennis Academy. But
you were there at RCI. Yeah, see, I was only there when it moved to Newport.
RCI is the real advantage. That was the home for a long time and how it was built. And the after-school program there was unbelievable. Like it was, you could go on every court and get the same instruction. And we were teaching kids well. And then that fed into an afternoon group. Then there was a before-school group. And really what it was, we'll throw in another name. I'm pretty sure you know, Anderson. But it would be like Mark Walpole would be teaching down in Mission Viejo, Mm-hmm. And, Mark just taught individuals, just privates. He'd say, well, if you want to go hit more balls, go up to Advantage. If you want to go play some sets, you want to get some, they're not going to screw you up. But if you need to hit more balls, you need more competition, you need some live ball training, he would say, just go up there. So it was really just a place where people in the area, the after school program was really good. And then people could come in as well that were very welcomed in. But no, you want to talk about the honesty of academy. If you've got a family who really doesn't know what they're doing, it's really a pitch of, we can get you this many hours training. We've got this many coaches. This is our college prep placement success rate. If the player was really serious, Jimmy would just say, Brandon, Dave, one of you's going to feed them and you got to break the news to them. Like you're going to film them and then you're just going to go through it with them. But that was a whole different type of person. Mm-hmm. You remember Julia Lillian, Steve, the left-hander from Phoenix? Mm-hmm. The mother had a meeting with Jimmy. I'd been away somewhere in the morning and I came back in and Jimmy said, this lady says she wants the truth, Dave. And I was like, all right, I'll film her. And it was amazing watching with them. But it was like, there were a lot of people like that. And some people would, laugh and just walk out the door. We'd say to them, look, don't hit a ball. Don't play a tournament. Don't do anything for 2 months. Just come here and we'll rebuild this. And we'll do this work for you. And that was really a couple of us who were doing that. But no, the bulk of it obviously was the lifeblood and keeping the after school very healthy. And you can walk into our after school and it wasn't, of course, like pure GreatBase. We were still doing a lot of other stuff to keep like the movement high and all that stuff. But the teaching, what I will say, was uniform across the courts. Like obviously Brandon was the director of that program. I was a big part of that program, but you could go on any of 6 courts with any age group and you could see what was going on. Like it looked very similar and uniform across the board.
Yeah. Brandon Fallon, great guy.
There's one story that comes to mind. If you don't mind me sharing this, again, naming names. Now that I've named a couple names, I might name a few more here. We have this one player by the name of Fuchs' brother, Alex. Not Alex, that's the brother, Zach. Zach Fuchs, he plays for BYU, and he was there with me at the time. And great story. So Jimmy brings everybody in and starts talking about tactics. And Zach asks Zach the question, Zach, when you play, what are your tactics? What are you thinking about? How are you going to structure this point? How are you going to win this point? What are you thinking about? And Zach, comedic timing, just takes a second and says, big serve, bigger forehand. And it was just great. No, but I understand. I mean, now looking back on it, when you have 40 kids that are all competitive and they want to get better, can't film everybody, it's not that you can't. It takes a Herculean effort to really put in the work to have everybody in tip-top shape and really help them out with their game. So I completely understand. So no shame on the coaches at all. And actually, to their credit, that if I stopped them and said, hey, what do I do with my stroke here? And they would give me the right information. Like they knew what they were talking about. But I understand this. It can be tough from a business standpoint when all these kids are coming at you, and plus double with their parents. That it's tough to try and remedy that.
It's the problem. It's the problem of scale as well, right? When you're running on 6 courts and you have a staff of, say Jimmy. This was before Adrian was there, but Jimmy McMood, who are the owners. You had Brandon, myself, Brian, Carsten Ball, and maybe 1 or 2 other coaches. You have a level of control, and then obviously we had a very good director of ops as well. But the meetings, everybody was sitting at one table. Everybody knew everything. And what happens is, the cost of doing business just skyrocketed, and the stress that put on where they had to expand. And one of our problems was a lot of the groups in the area were dissolving because they couldn't, we were doing well. And what happens is, we used to joke, we used to have 6 courts. There were 3 academies in RCI. And then one of the other ones would struggle. They would break up and we'd absorb their kids and we'd take their courts. And then another one would struggle and dissolve. And guess what? We take the kids and we take their courts, and we just kept expanding. And then you had more staff, more overheads, more insurance. You got more teachers that we had to do with the online learning. And then you had Brandon Fallon's astronomical salary demands. So you just it's like Jimmy just, he was so consumed with the growth that it was very difficult. And a lot of times these ideas at start, we felt very good about the way we were teaching tennis when we were on those back six, but will it scale? And I think you see that with all these academies. They start sometimes with decent groups and ideas, but can you scale and franchise tennis? It's generally the answer seems to be no, right?
The Racket Club of Irvine, beautiful place. I was out there training the coaches one time, and Jimmy said, Steve, why don't you go outside? We'll start outside. You just talk to the coaches. So I go outside and I just walk up to a couple of picnic tables, and Jimmy, great personality, comes out. He goes, excuse me, Steve. He waves me over. He goes, wrong academy. I was talking to coaches from another academy. You have 3 academies at one place. And, that's the demand of tennis. So a lot of times at a tennis club, the courts are really busy up to 11 o'clock in the morning, and they're not busy until like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's where the advent of homeschooling and so many kids having the flexibility. Dave Secker, your head coach, Simon Earnshaw, I love the research project he did on how many universities have pumped out pro players. How many players that are playing college tennis that come out of a big, large academy versus staying close to home and just going to a club? Do you have any numbers on that or any generalities?
I don't have the numbers on it, but the problem is how many years. You'll see a lot of times an academy will offer a scholarship to a player, let's say in their junior year of high school, who's already a layup to go to let's say a name brand college. And then obviously they use that in their marketing, right? So it's like, are they actually the academy that produced that player, or are they the one that's marketing that player? So, it's no secret NC State, we've had a lot of players from IMG. Simon used to work in the summers for Bollettieri. So we have that relationship with them. We've had a lot of players from that area. It's also an area that's right in our recruiting kind of footprint, but it's not as many as you think, especially coming in Europe. It's almost non-existent. They're not coming from academies. It's more federation at that point at this level. But I do think academies, if they're smart, I think IMG was one of the best at this. If you look at their college placement record, it's incredible. And they have an entire staff dedicated to that, and they do a very good job with it at all levels. Not obviously we're at one level, but there's a lot of schools in this country that have with the tennis programs, and I think IMG, they understand very clearly that, and just the staff they have dedicated to it, that is the bread and butter of the business.
With Dave Anderson, comments?
Yeah, when with a lot of them, but we're in player development, and this morning, I think it comes down to, I think Coach Secker hit on a key point. Do things scale? We've already been through this in the 30 plus years here, where it got mammoth at one point, because the concept of it really wasn't even here, and it was primarily after school stuff at that point. But I vowed never to go back to it, because even with what I felt was a very, very well trained staff, you can only keep your hands around so much. And but this morning I watched Coach Andreas. We had 3 different venues. Dion's leading one venue. Another coach who actually went through our program since age 5. He's 40 now. Won a title at WashU. And he's an unbelievable tennis teacher, and he's leading the second venue, and then Coach Andreas doing a third venue. And Andreas had like 16 kids. I put him on his own with 16 kids, and I was just popping to all 3 venues, trying to regulate them and make sure that it was there. I didn't even really need to, though, because the people in charge of them were so quality. And other pros that are either maybe not as experienced, they're totally comfortable following the lead, and just you can control things quite well with the right staff being trained. That's why, to me, coach education is everything. And whether it's an academy, whether it's college team, whether it's whatever aspect of player development we're all in, coach education is everything. And that's where the impact that the GreatBase has had. But I would just say, Steve, your efforts, because your efforts were so much earlier than the GreatBase name even evolving. And I think coach education is the key to everything we're talking about. I think you can have a great academy. Once you get the coach education, I mean, a great coach it's not about ratio. You hear that all the time. What are the ratios? I mean, I could have 25, 30 kids out there, and I'm not going to get a blink of an eye from a parent because, the kids know that yes is yes and no means no. And if I set 5 of them up on a court to do basket work, they're going to do the basket work. I've told the coaches many times here, I said, just don't get in my way or you're not going to be working here. I said, don't get in my way of player development. So you have the choice. It's your choice, but don't get in the way. And because sometimes it can slow the process down. When a coach is not well disciplined, not well trained. But I like having fresh eyes come in. That somebody who has no affiliation with anything we've done, and they're maybe a former player, and then trying to get them as far down the road as a coach too as possible. I mean, I really like the coach education part of it as much as the player education, to be honest. But it's a challenge. And again, I think it's a challenge all over our country because sexy sells and substance doesn't. And there's always going to be places that are sexier than yours, no matter where you are, no matter who you are, no matter what you do. And the minute that you know how it is. I mean, you build somebody up, and we always the first 7 years, the Jesuit principle, and getting them early, and then oftentimes the player and the parent thinks they've outgrown it, and sometimes that's the fault of the coach. I mean, some coaches fall asleep at the wheel. I think they could be a great coach, but you can't fall asleep at the wheel. You just gotta. It's a perpetual state of learning and movement forward, in my opinion. The coaching and teaching and playing, it's all just, okay, how do we go forward? How do we go forward? What do we got to keep learning? How do we improve? And I think when you exceed your boundaries, your limits, and you start growing because of the success, you have to be so careful that you don't grow outside of your boundaries. Otherwise, everything will spiral downward. And when it spirals downward at a rate that I think is very difficult to stop. It's like trying to stop a boulder rolling down a hill.
No, that's great input. With marketing, talk about that for a minute. GreatBase marketing. I mean, you're not going to find a white, a blue tube of toothpaste with no print on it. It's going to have a name. Same thing with a bar soap. Everything is marketed. To me, I always thought of Dennis Vandermeer being a great marketing person. And Jim Lair, who's made such a great contribution to tennis, he hooked up with Dennis. And then he went even a step further because he got connected with Nick Voltieri, great marketing person. But then with Nick, Jim got connected with Nick. He got connected with a young Jim Courier, a young Agassi. But I think arguably the best marketer in tennis is Patrick Mortigulu. I tease and say Money Gulu. I mean, his place right now, talk about sexy, it's right by Monaco. I was at his place when I was in Paris, but now he's in the south of France. And so he's got the touring pros. They can come over in their Ferraris. They can drive from Monaco where they're not paying taxes. And everything's free. courts, food, a massage therapist. It's all free. And I think that the consumer, Patrick knows right where to be on a TV, a match being televised, certainly at the booth, but even in the hallways. What a clever guy. He's working with Serena. What are you working on? I'm helping her with her serve. And then we find out that, Patrick is being paid, or he's paying Serena. And, maybe he's the greatest coach in the world, greatest tennis teacher in the world, but maybe he's not. But he's, I think, number one on marketing. Let me throw this out. If you're at Saddlebrook in the 1990s, you're a tennis parent, you go to visit, and as you walk to the restaurant, you see Pete Sampras coming down the fairway. Who wants to make a comment on that? Anybody?
Well, first of all, I'm the best tennis coach in the world. No, but I think, I don't know why you guys are laughing. But I think that, Mario Toglu, for example, I just got off the phone with an old roommate of mine who was a partner when he was in Paris. He was kind of with Bob Brett and those guys, right? But the people don't understand, I think. Mario Toglu is a very successful thing now. It's really the IMG of Europe, right? It's a huge thing. But they were losing, 300,000 a month at one point when they first got going. It was an investment. It was a business investment in what they did in the marketing and this. And obviously they had the big backer because of his father, right? But it's a very successful business model. And the blueprint, he's the social media new age version of Bolteri, right? Now, he might be okay on the court. He might not be, right? No one actually knows what they're selling is the brand. But it's like you're saying, the best tennis coach. You made this point, right? Anderson. Yeah. Why is no one searching out what is going on in Prague or what is going on in Moscow, right? Because it's not being commercialized and it's not being sold, but no one's actually asking the question, but without all this marketing and this, that, and the other, how are they doing what they're doing? I mean, okay, Russia's big population, but in Prague, with that population, and if they don't even touch these models. These models are completely foreign concepts to them, right? It's purely the tennis teaching. But the other point is, you think about other sports, right? A coaching tree. Like you could make a pretty easy argument if you want to go, like, say basketball, right? Phil Jackson ran the triangle offense. He won 6 championships in Chicago. Then he took it to LA and he won 5 championships. And then his player, Steve Kerr, then ran a version of it and has won 4 championships. You don't hear with these academies, you only hear about the players. You don't hear of like a coaching tree coming out of it, which to me is the big bit that's missing, because in Spain, the coaches are often affiliated with each other. You can say, well, that's a Pato Alvarez trained coach, or, Steve, you say you were a Braden trained coach, right? But in these academies, you're not hearing about, okay, who's training the coaches and who's doing this. It doesn't exist. But in these countries that are producing a lot of players without these, these huge complexes of tennis, it's really the coaches are the key, because every year the players keep changing. The coaches stay the same, right? I've seen that same Czech ITF coach. I mean, it doesn't even matter. He's just going to have 3 more players in the top 10 next year. The face will just keep changing, But I think that's a big bit that's being missed. These academies should be huge hubs for coaching development, right? And ideas being shared.
No, it's like going back to Federer's first coach. You think that people would really be interested in how was he trained when he was a young kid? But yeah, Sampras walking down the fairway, that's not going to help your child with a forehand. Now, I just did work at Roddick's Tennis Academy in San Antonio, but Andy was living in Austin. So the vibe, it's just, it does add to an environment when you have really good tennis players. I mean, it is a plus. But are you buying your players? Are you recruiting your players? And I can understand how college coaches obviously doing that. But we were watching the University of Virginia practice up here. They took a retreat up in the mountains, and the small group watching. See, guys and gals were developmental players. These are all recruited players. And we said it on a previous podcast that night where they read bios of the players. And they're all very, very accomplished tennis players. No, there's marketing. There's an academy that gives scholarships to rising seniors, and then they market where they're going off to college. I think that you mentioned, I think it's great, IMG. In other academies, I know they have 2, 3, 4 people helping with college placement. But when you see the names of the schools that a lot of the players are going to, that's really some big time, big name academies. They're not going to, their graduating seniors are not going to big time schools. But I think people have to realize that there's so many different layers to it, is that, really good players can move on. They're not even playing junior tennis. They're on the road. They're not at an academy anymore. But the families too, I think a lot of families have broke off, and like going back to the story of Andy Roddick and Marty Fish, we met with some parents this morning and said, well, there's all sorts of different ways to do this. And, you just have to make a list. What do you have to get accomplished? And certainly academics is first. What are you going to do regarding studies? Not in any order, but, you got to take care of fitness. You got to take care of the technical development, the tactical know-how. They need a high count, match play count, volume of sets played. I think that is one positive of these large academies. Hingis' mother, both at Saddlebrook and at IMG, she was famous for saying, I want my daughter to hit with everybody here. Doesn't matter their level. I want, her to see, feel everybody's ball, watch how they're moving the racket. I do think that if you look at, well, how many different sets are you getting to play? And I think that's one of the toughest challenges in tennis. Typically, I would say most academies, I wouldn't necessarily call it instruction, but they have a group in the morning and they drill. And then in the afternoon, they play matches. And certainly we would go through the assessment, and you've already mentioned that, both of you, that, okay, maybe somebody needs to take a time out and they don't need to do match play for a while. I have different experiences, having lived, I've certainly lived out in California. I spent a lot of time in California. I spent a lot of time in Europe, but to be in the U.S., a lot of people will come and see me for a second opinion. And we on day one, we're going to film their essential strokes. We film them now rallying, film them playing, running, throwing. And it's pretty incriminating if someone said, well, I've been at such and such academy. And it's not a matter of pointing fingers, but, how well are the coaches paid at academies? What's the turnover rate? How many coaches go through that revolving door? The story that Dave Anderson just shared with, having seasoned veteran coaches that you've worked with for a long time. Many times at an academy, not to name academies, but I've had students work at academies where the most important thing is that they can't let the consumer know that they don't know where the restaurants are. They don't know where the bathrooms are. And they just said in their orientation is, okay, we're going to put you next to so-and-so, just copy their drills. And, that's the factory. But a lot of times that's where, okay, that's a service. That's what people want. It's a disservice if people don't want to work on technique and say, okay, we're going to work on technique. But we have to have people write down, what are your goals? And they say they want to play such and such level. And then we do have to meet with the parents. When Dave and I went to Boca Raton, overnight, Seguso Bassett was the third largest academy, it was way up there with prestige at that time. Certainly it would have been Bollettieri's and Hopman's, and it used to always be called Hopman's. Now, if you do go to Saddlebrook now, if you go to the pro shop, you'll see the Hopman name, and you'll still see that great logo with the kangaroo. But it's totally changed, in my opinion, from the days of Harry Hopman when they used to work so hard. And I've worked with pro players that have trained both places, and it's just like with the USTA. The USTA, they've been in player development since 1987. But there again, there's been many directors, many different coaches. So I don't think you can just pinpoint and say, well, this is the way it is in such and such academy. But, a Bradenism is the umpire says, ready, play. And when you film someone, people say very clever things. Well, you don't teach individualistic style. You don't allow for, and it is true that, like say a Monica Seles is such an unbelievable player, she was an unorthodox player. She was an awesome tennis player, but you have to be critical. I think I would be sign up to say I'm the most critical of the GreatBase. And that is a marketing name. Richard Hernandez said tennis needs a GreatBase initiative, but the GreatBase was formulated in a lab setting over a 10-year period in the 80s. And the pillars are people who helped us, put systems and systems together. But the Family Academy, there's a Doug Carter. We did video for Doug Carter, Niagara Falls, White Oaks. Richard Hernandez set that up. I know Frankie Danzvik, Bruno Accidentality. Of course, he died in a motorcycle accident, became number one in the NCAAs. Those are just a couple players. It's really small academy. Let's talk about that because marketing means bigger because you got an overhead. What are your thoughts on the small academy versus the big academy? Let's go with Dave Secker first.
I think the idea is, and I think it's always been true in tennis, is you see bunches of players, right? We always look at the top, right? But you can name so many bunches of players that come out from the same thing. And I think that's the whole point of the academy is it does take a group to kind of push through, right? Like I think obviously you had that early group of volunteers like the Cricks Beans and the Aries Map, but then you always have the iconic like the Courier, the Sampras, the Agassi, the Wheaton, the Washington. You see it with the Spaniards. And I think the smaller, you can call it an academy, but that kind of idea, I think the Swedes used to do that with that sponsored team they had. We tried to copy in England, but we can screw up anything. But those groups where you get these pods of like 4 to 6 players, maybe 1 or 2 coaches, where there's just an identity to it. Obviously, I'm born 82. You think about like the tennis players that came out of Spain in 82, you got Feliciano Lopez, David Ferrer, Verdasco was in 83, Tommy Robredo, and a guy called Mark Lopez who didn't quite get up there in singles, but won the doubles in the Olympics. They were a group, and I think that works. I really do think if you're really trying to push the high end, a small focused group where they're really butting heads with each other and competing, but it's manageable. I think that definitely works.
Dave Anderson, you run a big program.
Yeah, I mean, we have a staff. I think there's 25, 26 pros. Not all of them work within the academy. But I think, why do people pay for private school $40,000 a year? You can't hide in the classroom. And what Coach Secker was saying, I feel like we try to do exactly that within our day in and day out operation. There's one-on-one training that's given during a perceived group. There's kids set up on a skill where they might be, here's what you need to do. And we set them up on the ball machine right next to my court. But yeah, having a core group, it's all good to have a team concept, right? From top to bottom. There's no doubt about that. To stand for something bigger than yourself, and be a part of that. But when it comes to developing the tennis player, with 1,440 minutes in a day, there's just not a lot of time to waste. And the better players, you've said it a million times, Steve. You need inspiration, you need information and perspiration. And, when you combine those 3 things, a lot of good things happen. But I'm a firm believer champions tend to create their own environment. They just make good things happen wherever they land. And They evolve out of too many different pockets and places and situations all over the world to not have that be the case.
They should be able to change the environment. Even if it's,
right.
You got a group of kids that have to do the dishes. Can someone step up and go, hey, let's make this happen. Let's get this done. Snap, snap.
So I think having like-minded people, having enough individual attention available to where you can get the job done that you need to get done to develop the tennis player. And that might be a different formula for each particular kid. Some kids might require a little bit more individual work, hands-on, however you want to. They might take a little more time in that capacity, but others you might be able to say, hey, this is what we're doing, and here's what you need to do, and now let's get it done, and they might just go. And that seems to be a rare animal these days, kind of a unicorn in this world. But I think that, again, quality coaching, right? And I think somebody asked me this today, and they said, "What would you rather have, a coach with a lot of information?" One of our staff members, and we were just kind of reviewing things, where we are, where we want to go, and for somebody who's willing to, maybe not that, maybe they don't have that great of handle on the information, but they're just working. They're a worker, and they work people. And I think of somebody, Steve, that your son Connor spent time with around here, and that you've met him, Barry McLaren from Baylor, who
from Scotland.
Barry was 20. Yeah, the Scottish. He came ready-made, in my opinion. He acquired a fair bit of knowledge about the system and the training that we try to do, but the way that guy conducted himself and the work he demanded out of himself and others was just. He intimidated me at 23. He was just, he had that voice, and it was just no meant no, yes meant yes. And so I could put him with any group and it was going to be productive. There's so much to be said about the strength of coaching. And unfortunately, the perception by the public on strength of coaching is simply based on the highest level players at the environment they're in.
I should know Red's last name all those years at Bollettieri's, but and that compound is so big now, is that if someone shows up and they're late, or they show up and they don't have their skip rope, they don't have their band, they don't have their running shoes, everybody in that group runs, and the coaches will get on a bicycle or a golf cart and make sure they don't cut the corners, and they have to get back. And now I guess it's like 4 miles around the facility. If they don't get back in a certain time, they got to run again. I think one thing you said, Chuck Reese, the first time I ever heard this, is he said, kids don't know how much you know. They don't care how much you know until they find out how much you care. Different stories about academies. My son Connor, you mentioned him. He just recently got married, and I didn't meet. I was there. I guess he was there for like just one segment of the wedding, perhaps the vows. But he's no kid anymore. But Douglas Eisenberg, his father Philip, I had no connection with Connor working for him. That's Connor's boss. So Philip Eisenberg owned the Welby Van Horn Tennis Camp, and how that happened is Philip was there on vacation, and he had a lesson with Welby. And Welby would never do this, but there was an emergency. He had to take a phone call. And Welby said, "Hey, I really feel bad. I got to take this phone call. I'll be back in 15 minutes. And he goes, "This kid's going to help you with your game." And Philip Eisenberg, first a lawyer, Cornell graduate, did so well in real estate. He was just wowed by how this 12-year-old was teaching him. And that's how the idea of the Welby Van Horn Tennis Camp happened. Is Philip and I, a businessman, said, "Hey, there should be a Welby Van Horn Tennis Camp," because Welby would be looked upon as the worst promoter. He was Dennis Van Meer. I remember Dennis getting upset with me. I went through his program the first time, and I raised my hand and said, "Who else should we study under?" Of course, Dennis is like, "Just me, nobody else." But he did say, he mentioned Welby, and he said, "Welby would be the worst resort tennis teacher in the world, but he would be the best junior teacher in the world. But he's not going to let you hit balls for 3 days, the first 3 hours. The first 3 lessons. And so Philip calls me up, and I'm just starting practice. This is maybe 5 years ago. And he goes, I need to talk to you. I said, well, Philip, I'm just starting to practice. Can I call you at lunchtime? He goes, yeah, I definitely need like 45 minutes of your time. I need to talk to you. So I call him up and I go, what's up? He goes, I got a meeting, and the meeting's about tennis teaching, and I want to talk to you. I get a lot of questions. And I said, well, what's the purpose? He goes, well, I'm meeting with someone, and I want to have some answers because I'm certainly going to make some statements. A lawyer doing due diligence. And I said, well, who are you meeting with? He goes, John McEnroe. And what became of it, so here's a guy who owned the Wellesley Van Tennis Camp, and he meets with McEnroe. And McEnroe basically said that his theory was people just need to learn to play. People just need to play lots of matches. Now, is that getting done? Now they've franchised, and there's several locations of the McEnroe Academy. Actually, David, there's some students that have been to your place that they saw me first. I sent them to Dallas, but you had students who spent time at McEnroe's, but that doesn't mean they spent time with John McEnroe, and that then you don't know, well, how long were they there? And again, it comes back to when Ivan started talking about his experience at a couple of places in Southern California. Sometimes a kid is just a drop-in student. Sometimes they're just signing up for 1 week. And, then if you hear any criticism from that person, it's not really the same as it, well, we trained there for 5 years. If somebody trained at a place for 5 years and they have no forehand and no backhand and no serve, that's where the academy, David, when you and I went to Boca and it didn't really work out, but the goal was to try to make the academy honest, to make it legitimate. Mm-hmm. Say that we're going to be in Boca Raton. We're going to have 27 tennis courts. And the whole thing was, we need to help American tennis. And
I think it was pretty cool though, how it, through even the limited amount of time, but the filming, et cetera. There were a lot of kids coming from a lot of different areas making a pretty healthy drive, just on a few, right? And we didn't even really have the length of time to impact people that much, but, I think it was actually ripe to spread like wildfire. Not to make any comments regarding that. I know it's a tough time out in California, but I really think at that particular time in South Florida, had everything fallen into place the right way. It was totally ripe. I don't think now it would be, but I think it would have been a very, very cool thing.
No, right now I'd say it's so much more saturated than it was. The academies, as we've said, they go up faster than 7-Elevens. But one thing, I would consider myself to be right down there, F- on marketing. Sometimes people visit and I'm wearing a sweatshirt from a different academy. But anyway, remember one of the owners, Arthur Cohen, I said, we need to get a lot of t-shirts. And I said, we need to train people free on Friday. And on Friday, they just play matches and have them bring their friends. And then we'll give it a go on anybody who wants to go through skill testing, have that filmed and film their strokes. And the program was growing in leaps and bounds. But you have to educate the consumer. If someone can see one of those narrated slow motion analysis. So we first were there for our listeners. It's like, and people were coming to Florida and they were making 3 visits. It was a big decision, as Dave Secker was saying, they're uprooting their family. They went to IMG, which had the most students, the best players, and they were going to Saddlebrook, which was, well established. But Saddlebrook had more pros that were on site. And that's where I certainly had a video influence going back to my hometown when I was in elementary school watching high school football, because Sam Volo, he had the old sequence analyzer. But then Braden was really into video, filming everything. And then I spent 10 years on this college campus. George Wilson was in charge of the AV department. So what we started doing is when a person would come to visit, we would make a study of their game and put it, back then it was on a VHS. We had advanced from reel to reel. And it's really interesting when you, do one of those narrated slow motion analysis. Unfortunately, it's a tool of persuasion. It's too verbose, but it's like, prevention of injury. The shape of the swing, the shape of the court. But I don't think that takes place nearly enough in our sport where people are filmed. I'll share one more story and turn it over to Dave and Dave. Steve Denton, who's been a guest on the podcast, he hired one of our students, and our student said, "No, that's not right. No, that's not right." So Denton calls me up and he asked me if I would come to Corpus Christi and train him. And I went to several times, but I remember Steve Denton calling me up when he was on the tour, and he was just curious how we were getting so many kids to win high school state championships. And Steve Denton was a very good player. He was 11 in the world, singles, 2 in doubles. I remember Vic Braden used to show his serve every week because he just had this nasty, huge serve. And so he's buddy-buddy with Lendl. So Lendl starts an academy in either North or South Carolina, maybe both. And then the question is, well, how involved will Lendl be? I mean, former number 1 player in the world. And so I remember the communication, nothing happened. They hired a director, a New Zealander. But I had a kid, Kelly Houston Jones, spent the summer with me. He was one of the best players on our courts. I had him play the whole summer with a wooden racket. He had already played a semester of tennis or a year of tennis at Florida State. And we have it all documented. He really improved. But what was presented by Steve Denton to Lendl, and that, it was basically what I said, well, tell him to send us his worst player for 3 days. And we'll do a pre-post. But I think what really happens is that level of understanding is there wasn't that connection. So it was presented, but it never happened. And I really think the players are the power brokers of tennis. If someone like Lendl, it's like, say, for example, if Roger Federer, had a really solid understanding of how to teach beginners, that's I don't think that's part of his background in tennis, that he spent year after year on, how am I going to teach a group of 10 8-year-olds? But those, a lot of times the kids that are that age and they don't have a very good beginning, they do end up in an academy, and it is presented where, how's it go? It's happy, it's busy, it's good. It looks like pro tennis. Their balls are being fed. People are running around in circles, and it's really just organized chaos. The old John Woodenism, don't mistake activity for learning. But there's so many stories I have. I think of being, with my last name Smith, there's a few Steve Smiths. So I put a call into Saddlebrook, and I put a call into Voluntaries. Of course, when I call, I'm not talking to one of the coaches. So I said, well, I've got a couple of Japanese coaches. We'd like to have a customized program. So if you could just come to your place for 3 days, and if you get back to me and what that would cost, we would just like to observe your program for 3 days. So I show up, and I've got 3 Japanese coaches with me, and we're there. We're going to, Munihiro Yoshida is writing the check, and it's like, okay. So just 3 days of just being right there and how they're running it. And so it's really interesting to be on the inside. I can remember being at one academy, and there's a boy on the court who won a national 12s that I had coached. And he had a 2-handed volley at that age. He's driving to the racket face square. And this is when I was with these Japanese coaches. And he's right on center court. And, his dad had bought a home there at this academy. And he goes, "Thank you so much, Steve. You put my son in position, and now he's at the big time." And I'm looking at the court, and he's just got the racket face open, the elbow down, backhand volley, and he's just knifing it. And it's just like, uh-oh. But that's where it's amazing. There's not a connection. Dave, that's a criticism we have of college coaches, that, you have a really good player come along, and next thing you know, you're the best friend of every college coach in the country. But then that kid goes on, maybe they choose another school, then you don't hear from the coach until you have another kid who's good enough to go to that school.
It doesn't sound familiar to me. No.
I never know who he's talking to when he says David.
I don't know.
I'll be David, you be Dave.
I talk to Anderson once a year when I'm heading to San Diego. I'm like, who am I looking at? He just gives me a list. Yeah.
I'm going to head out there. I'm going to meet you out there this year.
Yeah. We have a good time. But no, I think, you think about like some of the challenges you had, right, where you're doing that video, but nowadays with technology, why don't people know what's going on, right? Because it is a great mystery. It's like, well, obviously there's this big recruiting pitch and this marketing pitch, but in tennis now with the filming and the access to information, why shouldn't we have all this feedback and things like that? It should be a modern thing, but that actual piece of academies has not changed much. I mean, the marketing is obviously the social media and stuff now is an enormous part of the budgets, right? But it's not like parents are really getting that much more information than they were getting 10, 15, 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it comes back to the coach education. I mean, the documentation of progress and just, I mean, playing on the visual learning of a student and being able to split screen at any time, and show people a good look at themselves in a particular part of the swing and then show them a kind of a benchmark. I think that, and I don't say this because I don't say it to offend anybody, but I think that typically people teaching tennis become lazy. Even if they were, a lukewarm or medium worker to begin, I think that they, historically anyways, from what I see, they become lazy. It takes time to set up cones. It takes time to set up targets. It takes time to develop lesson plans. And I think that the work that it takes, for many people, instead of making them tougher and making them better, I think, I was thinking about it. It's no different than being a player, right? You got to be resilient. You got to wake up every day just looking for, improvement like grass growing. And I think that coaches as a whole get lazy. And I think one of the things with like mega church academies, we'll say, where they're, and I don't consider us one of them, even though we have a big program. I think that there's not a lot of personal investment from a majority of the staff. And I think that, they punch in, punch out. And when you have that mentality, it undoubtedly slides into the players. The players know who's bleeding tennis and who isn't. And kids do. Kids know when you like them or when they don't. I mean, they can just tell when somebody likes to be around kids or when they don't. I mean, they're the best gauge. They have the best radar for that in the world. And I think that, coach development in our country, despite whether tennis is healthy or not, whatever end you want to argue on that, I think coach development in our country is probably at an all-time low. I just got the Texas retreat, Steve, that you've spoke at. I know I've spoke at for the USPTA and now the RSPTA. It's held here in Dallas in a couple of weeks, and I looked at the lineup for the speaking, and three of the primary slots were devoted to non-tennis related racket sports. And then the others are all, things like how to increase volume at your club. And, then you'll have effective ladies drill. I mean, at the end of the day, that stuff just makes no sense for our industry. And it's just an excuse to get together and for people and have a few beers and hand out some awards that most people have voted for themselves on. And it is what it is. And we just have to, and that's why I was excited when I heard about what you guys were doing with ITA. That's a cool project. And I hope it can help spread, ripple outward. I've always been a believer in build a strong core and ripple outward. rather than throwing a huge fish net out and hoping you catch a few. And
I think with the ITA, the Integrated Tennis Association, certainly you want to help any way you can, but it would be so important to help with camps.
Yeah,
that effort was made with Dave Fish and Dave Benjamin. I was flattered that I was asked to get involved with the improvement of tennis camps. But yeah, you just got to keep on trying. Here's something. The late Andy Brandy, I was at now they're calling it the IMG, but the former Eddie Herr. So I'm coaching a young Canadian gal from Richard Hernandez's program. And at one time, she was the highest ranked ITF player in North America. Fast, had a backhand. I mean, she spent all this time with us. And I remember just telling Debbie Kirkwood, do not give her wild cards. She's in the 14s. Do not give her wild cards. She needs to keep developing. So Andy came up to me and said, Steve, you working with a student? I said, keep it a secret. Don't tell anybody. And it's just the opposite. Most people are going, yeah, I got a kid who's in the semifinals of the Eddie Herr. And it's like, no. I didn't teach. I mean, I have been working with her for the last 6 weeks, 7 weeks, whatever. But I do think that in the winner's circle, that there's too much recruiting in junior tennis. I do think that's one stronghold of tennis in Europe, where you play for your club and you there's loyalty, and you don't jump and work with the flavor of the week, one coach to the next. Here's a story I share very quickly. People have heard it before with Macy. When Dave Anderson, that's where I'm definitely an amateur podcaster. I've run a few more practices than I have run podcasts, but I should have said we're going to call Secker, and Anderson. But
you can call me Baldy, like TJ used to.
You got
Baldy.
I'll call you Popeye and Secker Brutus. You guys.
There you go.
Hey. He's the hero of the story.
But with Macy, now, all these years later, the film comes out, but we were right there. You're the one who told me to, hey, it's only 5 miles away. Just go put yourself right on the court. So I did it day after day and was watching Richard and Rick. And that wasn't that long a run, but we were right there. I remember Richard Williams being in the room where we're making videos. And to kind of look up and go, whoa. And I remember him having conversations with you. And, but there's a young boy, he became an All-American. He is in the Hall of Fame at the University of South Carolina. And, Rick came by and I said, look at this film. I didn't let him know it was the same kid. He had been at his place. So when he said, what do you think of this kid, Seth Rose? And he goes, I've never heard of him. I said, well, you and I are going to have a problem. And I said, because he was in your program for months, and this is him after he's been with us just 1 month, and this is what he was being with his mother and grandmother were paying, and he handled it so well. He writes about not this particular story, but in his book, Macy's Magic, you got to turn it around, and he turned beet red, and he said that's why you and I work great together. You bring him to third base. You get him all the way to third base and I'll bring him home. So that's what we started using that term, is that tennis needs more first base coaches. And I think Macy's a great motivator. He's a guy who has great love for the game. But he also will have people just come in. He has such a big name as people come in and take one lesson. But a program to me is, for player development, is a program. It's not a camp. Like say you have a program where people come and, okay, we train, basically every day of the year pretty much. But academies are fleeting, people come and go. And I think that's where, back at that time, now I know more about the Reebok money that Macy was paid. And he really, at that period in his life, he had very little understanding of what was going on around him, except for being, right there with Richard. But yeah, so the academies, I think people go to Rick's place now thinking that they're going to get the Richard Williams program. And the Richard Williams program, it was conveyed Hollywood versus history. They were on the court long hours. someone like a Stevie Longley was the first sparring partner. Long hours. They worked so hard. So, that rags to riches, I think you said it very well, is that people are not going to go to Nadal's large academy and have the same program that Rafa had with Uncle Tony. They just have to, okay, what is a common sense approach to all this? But with academies, I don't think it's a matter. Like the Canadians used to have this inferiority complex. Richard Hernandez got so many people, hit the ball so well at age 13, 14, but they had to go to Florida. They just had to go to Florida. And, this sounds boastful, or people like that can't be true, but I can't think of one player, I say this quite often, I can't think of one player who we started to work with and they didn't stay the course, and because of that, they did better. You just think, well, how do they? Because if you film them and you have a very good handle on how they hit the ball, and then you see them years later, and they're still flawed in that one area. They still have that one hole in their game. There always is that one kid you're a champion despite being inefficient. That's true in every sport. But hopefully, just discussing academies, we're giving some value, some insight to people who are listening to our podcast. Those 7 or 8 people that are listening. But let's go around the horn. Let's go with the best looking Dave. Dave Secker? Why don't you go first?
I think there's 2 big distinctions, right? You got the name academies from the former players. I mean, if say Federer opened an academy in Dubai next week, I think a few people would show up just out of intrigue, right? And certainly just to be around it. And then you've got the academies that are just like groups of people, it's like an identity thing that produce some players. But like you were saying, like going and watching Sampras play golf. But I think one of the reasons Spain got popular is like the club we went to was like, it was well known. That's when Sergio Bruguera was there, but it's like, that's when Luis Bruguera is there. But you were running the workouts with those guys. It wasn't a country club. You were basically, there were a few spots where you could get in and be part of the training. You weren't necessarily on the court with them every day or anything like that. But you were certainly in the gym with them, and you were certainly in the mountains with them. And that's different to this name brand, like selling the name of somebody to get an academy. And Spain started with that, and then it's become a little bit of the name thing. But I think those are 2 quite big distinctions, because you think about like Bollettieri, it wasn't built on the name of a great player. It was built on this coach who got a bunch of great players, right? And that's where you see there's got to be, if you took like the top, let's say 5-10 players of the last 10 years on the men's side, I bet you half of them have an academy.
Yeah. So there's a lot of franchising in India with the former players, and it's becoming more prevalent in Asia. I would say this, though. Remember handsome Patrick Rafter? Now, I was wearing zinc oxide before he was. I would put zinc oxide on my nose. And I'd like to say, I haven't done that many ladies' clinics, but if Patrick Rafter had a ladies' clinic and I was 5 miles away and I had a ladies' clinic, I think I'd get more people to sign up.
My wife thinks the world of you, Steve, but I'm afraid she'd be at Raptors.
Hey, here's a trivia question. Who's a player who's from Cyprus? Big smile.
Baghdadis.
Yeah.
So
he's got an academy in Cyprus. Yeah.
So I go to Patty Mortogolo's place, and he just comes right up, shakes. I went with my son Connor. We were doing this project with Jan Silva, and he comes right up, shakes hands, and I'll never forget that, though. They were not staying at that time. The place he had in Paris, they were not. I stayed in one of them. They weren't staying in luxurious. They called them cabins. There's these prefab homes. He did have the largest prefab cabin, but there were some significant hills. It was in farm country, and he was right out there running with the little kids. So Dave Secker, when you said running in the mountains, I do think that if the exposure is a big part of it, say for example, I can remember Rob Krejcik setting it up. He was nice enough to my kids didn't go, but he was nice enough to ask. They could have gone. They had something else going, but they went and hung out or Austin went to hang out with Pete Sampras for the day. All he did is watch him hit balls. And then one of the people came by and they're going to usher Austin away and not be like he's, just bugging Pete Sampras. And so I said, hey, yeah, these guys they want some privacy. And Pete Sampras said, excuse me, Austin's with me. And, you just think, Rob tells that story. That's a pretty huge story. And I had a psychiatrist tell me just this past week, he said that he thinks it's so important for a teenager to have an identity for, what they want to become before they're a teenager. And that's one thing that Rob and Sherry Krychek did really well, is that their son knew he wanted to be a tennis player. And, he went to Bollettieri, he's on a free scholarship, and, incognito, Rob would have him come work with me on the weekend, and I certainly know that he lost some refinement from his game, but he still, he was at Bollettieri's, and it's, idealistic. I think it would have been better if he went a little bit later, had a little bit longer, but, look at his record. He's an Olympian, a Davis Cupper, top 100 in the world. He's won in doubles. There's so many things that we put on our podcast where, at Nick's, he's rallying with Tommy Haas and he misses the ball. If he misses the next ball, he's just kicked off the court and they get another junior. You can't teach that. I remember one weekend I'm working with Austin on tabletop returns, and then he goes, and this is when he was at A&M, home on vacation, and then he goes and he's practicing with Karlovic, whose second serve about so high. Isner Karlovic. It's like, guys, here's the secret: you shouldn't even hit first serves. Those second serves, they're like impossible to return. Let's go with the bald guy.
I think, it comes down to, from the coach's end, if there's coaches listening, that, you want to create a winning culture around your environment, whether you call it an academy or whether you call it a program or a squad or whatever you have. You got to develop a winning culture, one that's based on respect and hard work. And, whether it's 4 kids or 40 kids, I believe in teamwork. And I think that to establish, if you use the word academy, you always associate that kind of with a curriculum. And there should be a curriculum that's based on more than just the fact that maybe you acquire a few ATP points or this and that. It's got to be substance based. It's got to have some bite to it that will carry your academy or your program beyond just a crop of kids. I always think of, Tylee, I think, is such a household name, especially with the Aussie Open, you hear his name constantly. But I think his best development at Illinois was, his best coaching was really with squads that didn't win the NCAA. And, he created that, and it carried over to where then when he got a bunch of thoroughbreds in there, then they were able to go the distance. You're never going to win the Kentucky Derby with a donkey, but you can still get the donkey to move a bit. And then if they're, for parents and for kids that might be listening, whatever environment you go into, you always want to make it better. You want to make your academy, you want to make your club, your environment you go into better. The parents, your kid might be ranked, 1 in your section, but if you as a set of parents are ranked 200 because of the trouble that you create and the problems that you might make inside of that environment, then it's just not worth it from a coach's end. And to give all the parents out there a little tip, if you want your coach to work hard for you, make it a pleasant experience. And I don't mean that you have to agree with them all the time, but be a part of the solutions. Hard talks don't have to be, hard in the sense of, where it's just violent in nature. They just have to be had. And I think that, going into any situation. I mean, these people who, like you said, Steve, the problem that I have with all of it is it's just become a huge bop and shop business that's been created. And I believe in most things in life, less is more. And as long as you have adequate competition, as long as you have quality instruction, and as long as the player has the will, to just compete and each day out on the practice court, whether they're drop hitting a ball, whether they're playing a set, doesn't matter. I think you can get there. And I think that, with the word academy, I think that we've worked further away from it. Just like Billie Jean King said in her book, the words private lesson have, in a sense, kind of paralyzed development in our country. And I'm a big believer in a private lesson, but, I felt like every time I got to sit at Tennis Tech back in Tyler, Texas, when you were talking to 100 plus coaches, it was a private lesson, even though I was just one of those 100. It's just about gathering of information. And so, yeah, I think, people often have to experience things on their own to be aware of it. So many of the people, even if they kind of have a gut feel that maybe some of the stuff we're saying tonight might be true about a particular place or this thing they may be attracted to, I think oftentimes they just can't resist the lure and the allure, and they're gonna have to learn it for themselves. And again, that just takes time. And that's the one thing that we don't want to waste too much of. So it's been fun to talk about it.
That's well put. With Welby Van Horn, great player, he used to just say, it's a bonus. It's a bonus to be a great player. I do think many academies are with a name player. Here's a trivia question as well. Just retired, cool cat, 43 years old, Indian, doubles champion. Who am I thinking about? Rohan Bopanna? Yes.
Ram.
Yeah.
Oh,
Rohan Bopanna.
Yeah. So Arvind
Open up.
I spent a little time with him because Ram Ramanathan. I was with him at the U.S. Open 2 different times. And all the Indian players were watching Ram play. And I said, sit right here. And I went into the players' lounge and I asked Rohan, hey, can you join us? And we're just going through the stats. But I know Arvind at Teaching Pro Philadelphia, he was trying to get Rohan to look at the content online, but it just is not the same. I mean, if someone's really going to get a handle on the information, it's like you need to come around for a little bit. It's like the conferences are great, but an hour and a half lecture or even an hour lecture, it's just not going to cut it. But to actually go and watch player development, most people don't do that. I've got 3 things, and we'll turn it over to Ivan to just go through a few pointers that hopefully we've made. Number 1 for me would be the anti-academy. That's where people should start. It's not about winning and losing. It's just, okay, we're going to work on technique. We're going to cross-train, work on multiple sports, just like, early childhood development. Elementary to junior high, then I'd go from anti-academy to pre-academy and then go to an academy. But I think people are skipping 1 and 2 and going to 3, and it's not working. In the end, there's just not enough players being produced. We've got a young kid up here who's been here many times, and he's a great kid. And hopefully he all of a sudden decides to get up one day and become a runner and start to move. But he has fantastic technique. And his technique is not really going to help him unless he, can put the pedal to the metal and start to move his feet. But he's been through the anti-academy, the pre-academy. An academy would be very good for him if he could go to a place where run and gun, kill or be killed, survive, the survival of the fittest. Because you certainly can get stuck in over-teaching, over-coaching. Let's go to Ivan. What do you got?
Just a few notes here that I found important and interesting. The word intent. Win or lose, how do you want to play? Champions create their own environment. Kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Look for improvement like grass growing, and develop a winning culture. Short one today, but those are the ones I noted.
Highlight for me was Dave Secker on intent and manslaughter. Why don't you say that one more time, Dave? How's that go with those scooters?
If I come down the hill and you're riding that scooter in front of me, and if I get you and they can't prove intent with a good lawyer, good behavior, no priors, I'm just getting manslaughter. I might get like a suspended sentence. But obviously, if they can prove it, I'm in trouble, right? Yeah.
No, I think that's great.
There'll be a job opening at NC State.
Tell us about NC State. How's it look this year for you guys and gals?
Looking good. We're looking good. We had just came back from Miami. We did well. We played 3 top 25 teams, real competitive, great, hot, slow courts. Let's just grind. We're sore. Played a ton of matches. Everybody played all 3 setters. It was great. My two freshmen got off the plane from Athens with a bleeding ear and a perforated eardrum. So I spent New Year's Eve literally in the ER with her. So she wasn't allowed to play, but we've got to get her up to speed. She's good. We were good. We're really young. Start of last semester, going to the year, we had 6 out of 7 teenagers. Now we just added another one. A couple of them turned 20, so that's good news. But now we're young, just very enthusiastic. I mean, they're consuming this information right now. You know, we did like Lendl Grid today. We were doing Lendl Grid for an hour. And it's fun, you know. I think you said there, coaches, we do get lazy, right? Which is why sometimes having that new injection of people who haven't heard it, it re-energizes the coaches. And I certainly enjoy it because you got to go through it again and you got to sometimes say it in a different way, right? And say it so that the player can understand it. But it's so invigorating to have young players and good athletes who say, oh my God, that makes sense. Like, courts get smaller with angles. Maybe I should not try as much angle. Okay, and they're already good players. But no, we're in good shape. We're very young, very enthusiastic, and we'll make some absolutely ridiculous mistakes, I'm sure, this semester. But I think we're in a good place. Yeah, we're feeling good.
And I checked the University of Virginia schedule, and I'm going to go to Florida. I'll be back. They're playing Stanford. Tell us about Stanford being in the Atlantic Coast Conference. How's that happen?
Well, we had 5 of the top 10 teams the last 3 years. So we thought, you know what? Why don't we just try and make it a little bit more fun than women's tennis in our conference? We were like, you know, who could we get? So we went and got Stanford and Cal at our conference. You could be top 5 you could be top 5 in the country, theoretically, in the ACC next year or the season, and not be a top 4 seed at the ACC tournament, which has actually happened once. We were 2 years ago. I think we were 3 or 4 in the country, and we were the 5 seed at the ACC tournament, which was brilliant. But it's great. You just think about the demographics. ACC is a certain type of school, right? It's going to be high academic in a metropolitan area. Well, you can't get more high academic in a metropolitan area than Stanford and Cal, right? So they've had to somehow arrived in our conference.
Are you home or away with those schools this year?
Unfortunately, they have to fly to us. So I'm hoping they're not too jet lagged. But we also have your SMU Mustangs, Anderson. They decided to join the party as well, and they're looking better. They're looking better and better.
Good. One of our girls is there right now, trying to make her way. Kayla Shefke.
Oh yeah, I know Kayla Shefke.
Yeah,
Steve was very excited the first time he met her.
Yeah, she had some bad luck with injuries through her latter part of her junior career, but boy, she can play some double.
I saw it when she fell at the Eddie Hearn.
Eddie Hearn.
She fell and broke her wrist, right?
Yeah, and played through to the final. Yeah, good kid.
A wonderful kid, yeah. Wonderful kid, yeah.
Moody Coliseum trivia, last trivia. We'll get off the line here, let people go to sleep before we put them to sleep. I remember watching the WCT finals. They were played at SMU. Moody Coliseum was amazing. Laver, Rosewell.
I think I was there with you watching Leach and Pugh.
Yeah. Doubles with.
All right, final trivia of the night. 3 women left-handers have won the Australian Open. Who are they?
Left-handers, huh? I'm already thinking about she's not a lefty, but I say this all the time when I think about the Aussies. I think people have already forgot Ash Barty, how she played.
You wasn't left-handed.
Navratilova has to be one of the lefties.
Yeah, it's one. That's easy. Yeah, it's a layup.
That is a layup. Another lefty. Come on, Anderson, your turn. I got one.
Yeah. You got three people on this thing. Oh, you can have to.
With three lefties. I know the U.S. Open has won 10 years in a row. On the men's side by lefties. Vilas, Arantes, McEnroe, and Connors. As soon as I hang up, I'll get two, but I don't know if I can get three. Who are they?
Well, one, you're going to kick yourself because it's unorthodox. She's lefty, but two-handed on both sides.
Stella.
Yeah. That's the one everybody always pictures. And then Angelique Kerber.
Oh, Kerber.
Okay, three lefties.
Yeah.
I hate getting jumped.
Maybe by the time this podcast comes out, the Australian Open will be over. Who's going to win the men's? Who's going to win the women's? Now we sound like some other podcast. It's interesting. You're talking about pro tennis all the time. What do you got, Ivan? Who's going to win the women?
The women.
Goran Ivanisevic is a new student.
Elena? I haven't given it much thought. I mean, it's hard to go against Arina Sabalenka. She won it last year, the year before then. She's looking good. I mean, it's tough to go against her. I haven't given it much more thought past that. On the men's side, I'd guess similar. It's just tough to go against Sinner. He's number one. Has winning everything. I'd like to see Alcaraz go for the career slam, youngest to ever do it by many years. That would be a story. It would also be nice to have like Zverev win one. I'm not the biggest fan of Zverev in terms of a person, but as a player, I would like to, some resolution with his game and his career eventually. He's like, okay, he got one finally. There's some tension between him and finals and such. And it would be nice to see him. And then Medvedev, I'd like to see Medvedev up there. I don't know, a lot of players I'd like to see.
Coach Secker, who you picking?
You just listed like 11 players in the draw.
No, I said Sinner, Sabalenka. I'm going favorites.
Sinner, Sabalenka. Okay. How about from England? Who do you got, Coach Secker?
Well, Zyda's winning the women's, obviously, but Galf will win the women's. God, I want to say Zverev, but it's just going to hurt me. I'll say Zverev, Galf, but Snyder's obviously winning. Obviously,
she's intense. Yeah, you're right though. I saw the match. She was not breathing out. She was tight. And how about you, Davey, baby?
It's going to be Alcaraz and Sabalenka. If you want to place some bets, now would be the time.
Yeah,
Alcaraz is going to have a breakout year.
That's a bold pick. Yeah, he's an up and comer.
Yeah, he's. I don't know. I think there's good things in his future.
Yeah.
I actually think he's going to have a great year, though.
I'll finish with an Alcaraz story. Nadal got done practicing at the Open a couple of years ago. Dana and I are fighting our way onto the court. We're like, Dana's like, why is there such a big crowd? I'm like, oh, they obviously know I'm practicing. And we get out there and it's like the corner courts, and Dana and I are in the corner. I think it's like court 14. The reason the huge crowd is Alcaraz goes on the court after Nadal's practicing, so the crowd just swells. He's like sitting in the middle. He's just such a nice guy. He's like smiling at everybody. Just takes his shirt off. The crowd starts whistling. I said, Dad, I'm going to take my shirt off right now. She's like, don't do it, Dave. Don't do it. I said, no, look, that's the crowd wants it. And she's like, don't do it. I said, all right, I'll keep it on just because you said, boy, when that ball comes off that racket, that is a different sound. Like up close, there's a few people I've seen hit the ball, but the way he hits the ball, that's a different sound.
Yeah. Fun to watch.
Oh, it's exciting.
Yeah. No, amazing.
So where are you taking, Steve? You didn't pick yet, Steve.
Ash Barty. With certainly for the game. I mean, center, the way he he's so humble. I mean, Alcaraz, a sense of enjoyment. But if I had to pick, I would pick Alcaraz. I just
Good money.
I just think it's going to go back and forth between those two. I think the media, although center, he's got a bigger serve. I did read or hear Alcaraz say he knows he needs to get looser on his serve. He's got a bit of a hitch and chain puller. I mean, and then people have to realize, well, if he were to change that, it could get worse before it get better. But his serve, he's not getting as many free points. But no, I'd go with Alcaraz. On the women's side, because of the heat, I would go with Swiatek. If it's like it can be down there, I mean, she's just. I just think that a lot of players don't have the skills. She's such a great counterattacker, and I think Sabalenka is great for the game, but she can have some really bad days from, especially from the service line in. I love to listen to her. She was so critical of herself the year that she lost the U.S. Open to Goff, correct? And yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's amazing that those players, they say Goff, her name was mentioned, and say Sabalenka, if they were to get better, they have to go right back to what we're talking about as fundamentals. There's a few things that they could improve upon. Same thing on the other side, but they're so good. They're so good. I do think one thing, Peter Burwash, the late Burwash used to say this, that it's actually a little bit of a bad thing when people have so much exposure to watching the top players, because, it's like they're not from planet Earth. The way they play at such a high level. So Chuck Creasy said that when we spoke to him, is that, it was much better years ago when some kid, now he wants to be a 13 to play men's college tennis at a high level, and he's a 6. So that just takes the air out of the balloon, They don't realize there's so many steps to get to the top of the mountain, and they're watching. And it's very easy to say, okay, I understand where you can have the awe factor. And then you can get discouraged that my tennis is so much behind these top players. But academies, hopefully we made a sense. Consumer beware. There's just like anything, there's a lot of ups, a lot of downs, but people need to be able to read it and figure out the situation. But Dave and Dave, thank you very much for being part of the podcast once again.
A lot of fun.
Cheers, guys.
All right.
All right. Go watch the Aussie. Have a good night.
Yeah. Thank you. Good night. All right, Ivani, baby. Podcast 232. Dave Secker, thank you. Dave Anderson, thank you. Listeners, 233. Thank you. 233. If we get to 260 for 5 years of podcasts, I think they are very good for putting people to sleep. Anyway, wave goodbye to the camera. We're done. Adios.